Let's look at slide number 3. When as teachers we react, that's an automatic, spontaneous response based on an old emotion. When we react instead of responding, responding is to choose in the moment. Not a knee-jerk reaction, but a response that is thoughtful, mindful about the needs of the child as well as our own. That happens to all of us, to all elders and teachers, because we have been triggered. In fact, when we think we're reacting to the child in front of us, we're often reacting to a memory from our own past that is superimposed over the child in front of us. Instead of responding to our student in the present moment, what's happened is that the student's behavior has activated a body memory, and I'll explain that. They have become triggers. The student's behavior has been a trigger to body memory. Body memory, let's look at what that means in slide 4. There are 2 kinds of memory. The first is narrative memory. That's the usual memory that we're familiar with, in which we can tell a story of what happened in an order of events, and we have like a video playing in our heads about this happened and then that happened. Narrative memory is principally organized by the hippocampus in the brain. There's a separate kind of memory called implicit memory by the neuroscientists. Psychologists like to call it body memory. And that's organized by a different part of the brain, the amygdala. Body memory is when our bodies remember the feeling of the past, as in bodily sensations and principally emotions. Something in the present acts as a trigger and an old emotion comes up from a situation that was very similar in our own childhood. That's a very important process to understand, because as elders we are frequently triggered by our children. This happens to all of us. When we're triggered, old emotions come up from our past. This alters how we see our students as well as how we see ourselves. That's important to understand. As these emotions come up from our past, that changes the way that we see. The emotion changes our eyes. We start to see each other and ourselves differently. That's called projection. So that we're projecting something from our past story onto the child in front of us as well as onto ourselves potentially. Now, when we're unconscious that this is going on and we're seeing the past superimposed over the present, we're likely to react in a way that is not in the child's best interest or in our own. Our reactions are out of tune, they're misaligned with the true needs of the present moment. But when we become conscious that we have been triggered, when we're intentionally aware of the inner child in ourselves, we can actually use the body memory as very helpful information, both our painful and our happy memories. They can help to give us new insights into the needs of the child in front of us, and it helps us to decode their most bewildering, vexing, and challenging behaviors. We start to be able to see more deeply through the superficiality of the child's behavior. We understand our students via the pathway of understanding ourselves more deeply. And that's why learning for a teacher about how their own life as a student impacted on them emotionally, it can be so very essential. So sometimes, to reiterate, sometimes our past blocks our capacity to see the student clearly. We project images from our past over the student. It's like an emotional wall that prevents us from seeing clearly. And at other times, our past blocks our own effectiveness, our capacity to assert our needs to the child, our capacity to be self-confident in our voice. One example of that is perhaps if in your life as a student you were treated very harshly, that there was a lot of shaming, a lot of humiliation from your teachers, a lot of punishment, and that made you feel so diminished and so ashamed. And as a result of that, you swore that you would never cause any of the children in your care to feel that way. Quite often, elders, adults, teachers over-inhibit their capacity for self-assertion, to use a strong voice, to make demands, to set boundaries of the children in the classroom. So we become way too permissive, and then our children lose their trust in us. So it can go two ways. Our past can cause us to overreact, or our past can cause us to underreact. And in both those scenarios, we're disempowered as teachers. I really think that there's no other way but to understand our own childhood experiences better. What's required, I think, is a fundamental shift in our focus, so that when there's a difficulty with a child, instead of the old habits of asking, what is wrong with this child? And sometimes we do that in a well-intentioned way. What's wrong with the child? Well, perhaps that's not only about the child. What if we ask, what is this child bringing up for me from my past? And there's nothing to be ashamed of in that, because that process is what happens to absolutely all adults, parents, grandparents, teachers. We are triggered. That's part of being human. And that would be a very powerful practice that would bring about some new possibilities, to remind ourselves to ask not just what's wrong with this child, but what is this child bringing up for me? That's a reversal. It's a revolution in the traditional focus. And it builds an empathic bridge once we free the child from our own projection. So next we would ask, if I was in this child's shoes, what would I need? But the thing is, in one way or another, at least a little bit, you have been in that child's shoes. Your life is not like the child's life. But you've experienced at least a little bit of what this child is going through when they are being, difficult or disruptive in some way in the classroom, or unable to function or perform. You've experienced that at some time in your childhood, even if it was only for a moment. What did you need when that was going on for you? What helped you? What didn't help you? Can you see how understanding our own past is a wonderful bridge, a conduit for understanding our own students more clearly? So what we do when we don't just make everything, all problems about the child, but about the child and us, the child and the environment, when we continually ask, what's coming up for me? That's about taking ownership of our own reactions. It's really about our own maturity and self-responsibility. Taking ownership of our own reactions begins to bring the possibility of healing for us, as well as freeing us up for choosing new responses. So we can understand, in slide 8, understand the difficult child by understanding ourselves. Let's try this exercise. When there is one of your students behaving in a way that you find difficult, in fact, I will ask you to think of a time when you are experiencing a stuckness, a difficulty with one of your pupils, students, one of the kids in your class. one of the kids under your care. Take a moment to remember that situation. And now I'm inviting you to ask a most unusual question. Think of a part of you when you were a child that was most similar to the way that this student is behaving, that gives you most trouble. And I know that you and the student are very, very different people. But find the closest similarity. If the child in question is a bully, when were you ever overbearing to somebody as a child? Or if the child in front of you is somebody that refuses to work, when did you perhaps drag your feet or refuse to do some of your work as a child? Whatever is most similar, that part of you that is most similar to the child. And the question to ask right now is, how was that part of you treated? When you were a student, how was that part of you treated? The next question is, when you were treated along those lines, in that manner, notice, if you can, how that was for you emotionally. How did the adults or the teachers' responses cause you to feel? Just take note of that. The third question. What would have been most helpful for you in that moment? When you behaved in a way that's similar to the child that's giving you trouble right now. In your wildest dreams, what would be the best possible thing that your teacher at the time could have done for you that would have most empowered you, freed you, put you in touch with your strength, with your own intelligence, your sense of safety in the world? What needed to have happened for you? What should have happened for you? Okay. That might give you some very valuable clues about what your student needs. This is a process of understanding, or trying at least to understand your student by unpacking your own experience as a student. Can you see how your body memory is such a valuable tool, a treasure trove of information for you? So it's helpful to go to the place of pain and difficulty of your own lived experience as a student. Not because it has intrinsic value to feel the pain all by itself, but because the discomfort you felt as a child points to a need that was underneath it, a developmental need, an educational need. If you can validate that need that perhaps was not met on that day. Not only that brings back your sense of self-worth and might give you clues about something that you need more of in your life for your healing and growth as a person, as an adult, as a teacher, but it also gives you powerful hints about what your students need.